There we go. Adriana Bucci, welcome to Beyond Trauma. As I mentioned, very important topic that I've been wanting to delve into on this podcast. So thank you so much for making the time for us.
Hey, Laura, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our chat today.
You are an expert on narcissistic personality disorder, dealing with narcissists, and the trauma that can and does cause. In this podcast, we focus a lot on trauma um, and some of the roots of trauma. And I think with dealing with a narcissist, it's complex trauma. It's ongoing, um, and it has a lot of lifelong effects. So maybe you can start us off with kind of how you define a narcissist. And I know that word is getting a little more traction. How do you define it?
Totally. So, anyone can do a quick Google, find all the traits, where it says they're arrogant, controlling, manipulative, all that kind of stuff. But it can get very tricky in certain other relationships because they're not all very obvious. And so, what
Hmm.
I like to tell people is that you're going to notice a cycle if you're dealing with a narcissist of love bomb, devalue, discard. Basically, they're nice to you, they're mean to you, you're dead to them, then they're nice to you again, mean to you
Wow.
again, you're dead to them again, rinse and repeat. And that's basically what the whole, like, that's all you can look forward to with a narcissist. And so it's going to manifest in different ways depending on the context of the relationship and things like that. But that's really the main pattern that you will absolutely notice once you kind of know what to look out for. And their main goal is supply. And supply is your emotional reaction. So they're basically chaos enthusiasts. They want to get an emotional reaction out of you. They enjoy seeing you in like a state of emotional distress. They want your time, your energy, your words, your engagement in pointless circular conversations, arguments, things like that. And, that's really the telltale sign. So, when you stop giving emotional reactions, they're going to be upset about it, right?
Mm.
Whereas normal people, they don't operate that way.
Yeah, this was a new term for me doing some research and listening to you speak, this supply. It almost reminds me of like what are those, like zombies that need to go out and yeah.
Literally, like, they're sucking out your energy pretty much, like energy vampires.
And that's what they feed off of, is getting that reaction off of you.
Totally.
Wow. Yeah. And in the past when I thought about like narcissistic relationships, being in a relationship with a narcissist, I don't know why I always thought about that in terms of a romantic partnership, but they're not just romantic partnerships. And I know your personal story has to do with your mom.
Mhm.
And after learning about that, I started to delve into that more. And a lot of people have, unfortunately, a relationship with a parent like this. What's unique to that? And um, as much as you're comfortable, I know you came on and you've talked about this before, but I always like to have a little grace for capacity where you're at today. Maybe you can share a little bit about that experience with us.
Yeah, totally. I'm an open book, so feel free to ask anything about my narcissistic mother. I am totally okay to talk about anything, but I appreciate, checking in. So yeah, basically I had no idea that I had a narcissistic mother until I was in a breakup with a narcissist. So,
Mm.
go figure. It was like just like existential crisis city basically. So I had this extremely confusing short-lived relationship with a narcissist. I had no idea at the time. And so I started kind of googling his behavior, and then I realized, oh my gosh, like I have a little pattern. I've dated more than one narcissist, but because those other relationships were like longer, it was easier for me to blame myself, right? And further down that Google rabbit hole, I found, something that said like 10 signs your mother's a narcissist or something like that. And it just, my brain exploded, existential crisis, things started to make sense. And yeah, it was just such a wild kind of revelation.
Hmm. Is that common? Is there kind of, it grooms you, and because you're subservient, and that becomes that pattern, that dynamic that you're used to with the parent, that you look for that with a partner?
Yeah, pretty much. So like, it's not that you're consciously looking for an abusive partner because like no one no one does that.
Right.
People go into this with like really good intentions, but when you're raised by a narcissistic parent, that is like your early example of like how people are and how, relationships operate kind of thing. And so you kind of become like a narc magnet in a
Mm,
way because you're already so, a shell of who you could be that they can pick up on that. They can smell the vulnerability on you and they target you, whether they know your life story or not. Like they know if someone's going to be a good target or not. And I was a great target because I had that upbringing. The behavior and abuse was just so normalized to me that, I just never thought twice about it until that final relationship. And I
mm,
was like in my mid 20s at that point too. So it's like, I also had that moment of like, oh my God, I wish I knew this sooner. I wasted so much time.
mm.
Um, and of course, in hindsight, it's like, no, no, like everybody, it's going to be okay. You've got the rest of your life ahead of you. So as long as you figure out in this lifetime, it's all good. But yeah, pretty much I was a prime target for a narcissist. And I also realized that I had narcissistic friends, bosses, colleagues, acquaintances, all the things. Like they were pretty much everywhere. And I thought something was wrong with me,
Mm.
but it turned out that, like, no, this is just what I'm used to. This is what I believe is normal. And this is just my normal.
Yeah, of course. If you didn't know different from as a child, we just know what we're raised with and in, and we think, we're the fish in the water. So until we have other experiences that might wake us up to that we don't have to be living that way,
Hmm.
that's the norm.
Exactly.
And so I thought that was really helpful right from the get go with kind of explaining that cycle to us. What are some of the dynamics that we might see, or how might a narcissist speak to you? They want to, they feel that they're more important. And they want folks around them to feel that way. How would they be? How would we see that? Maybe you can give us some examples.
Yeah, totally. So it really depends where you're at in their cycle,
Okay.
right? So if they are love bombing you, they're really nice to you. They're saying, all these great things and basically anything you want to hear that is going to gain your trust. So they might start, sounding reasonable. They might, shower you with affection, attention, admiration, gifts, things like that. And then once they're satisfied that you have you've started trusting them, that's basically exactly when the devaluation starts.
Hmm.
So the devaluation, at first, it can be a little bit subtle, right? If it's like a romantic partnership, like that first cycle is very, very subtle because they're kind of trying to see what they can get away with. Obviously, the cycle continues over and over and over again, and then it gets worse and more obvious over time. With a parent, it's just how you grew up. So it's just like, oh, like mom's going to be nice today. Mom's in a bad mood today. Like just whatever excuses that we come up with to justify the abuse because we're so conditioned. And so, yeah, the devaluation, it might be like a little dig, like, oh, like, you know, you always do this when, I don't know, like, I don't know. They might say something like when you're on your period or like whatever, like just to sort of like make a little dig at you.
Hmm.
Um, and then it can get worse where they just start saying like what a horrible person you are, you're the scum of the earth. Like it can really range, like just really depends. And like they'll gaslight you too, which is basically when they try to make you question your reality. So, they will have done or said something and it can literally have just happened and you call them out on it and they'll be like, no, you're going crazy, like you're remembering wrong, like that's not how I meant it, you're too sensitive, you're overreacting, it was just a joke, things like that.
Mm.
And just really what they really do in that devaluation stage is they start sort of planting the seeds of like doubt about yourself, and the emotions of guilt, shame, and fear. And
Yeah.
those are really the emotions they condition their targets with because anybody in those emotional states is easier to control. And then when you're in the discard stage, the way they talk to you is they don't. you're dead to them, right? And the discard can be confusing for, a lot of people because it might not seem obvious at first. And so, in like a romantic partnership, the discard, it'll be like, they dump you and then they start dating somebody else and you don't hear from them for however long that relationship lasts. And then they come back with the love bombing whenever it suits them. However, with like a parent, or, if it's in those early stages of the cycle, it can be 5 minutes of the silent treatment. It can be, them just completely dismissing something you said and then they start over with love bombing. It can be you go to bed angry and then they wake up as if nothing ever happened and then we're back in the love
Mm.
bombing stage. So those are basically like the three ways that they'll communicate with you.
Yeah, it's making so much sense to me now how that would result in a trauma response,
Hmm.
because the trauma response happens right when we're no longer able to trust in our body's signals,
Yeah,
and that's basically what they're doing is it's confusion and disorientation.
exactly.
Yeah, and so that might show up in not knowing what you think or feel um about anything, right? Like what gives you your own personal pleasure, what things you like or dislike, because that's all everything you're doing is to please the narcissist.
Exactly. You have like no sense of self, basically.
No sense of self. That's a great way to describe it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so for you, coming from a childhood where you weren't given a time to develop that sense of self, because you were always in reaction
Hmm.
to your mom. And, as a young organism, we're just trying to stay safe. That's
Exactly.
really different. I mean, both are awful, but then then a future partner, because we need that person so much.
Exactly.
We need them for all to get all our basic needs met.
Yep.
And that first and primary caregiver is so deeply important. So I imagine that you did a lot to please your mom, and I'm curious how that showed up, and then what that disconnect was like for you in regards to finding your own joy, your own pleasures, your own sense of self.
Yeah, it was you know, a shit show. um,
Yeah.
like it was wild. Like, yeah, I really had no sense of self. Like everything was like I needed my mother's permission or I needed to talk to her about like any decision I made kind of thing. And then eventually recognizing that she's been trying to have power and control over me for my entire life, like was a big revelation. And it wasn't until this is going to sound really random, but I I knew my mother was a narcissist since 2014 basically, but I was in therapy, but like not getting any tools or like validation or like, you know, anything useful other than just like talking for an hour a week and like not really sure where it was going.
Yeah.
Um I thought I was doing what I needed to do. And it wasn't until I had really severe physical chronic pain that started in 2015 after a wisdom tooth extraction. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. And then 2019 rolls along. I'm at rock bottom, like just excruciating pain every single day. And I learned about something called the mind body connection.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I'm sure you know all about it. So basically, the idea that physical chronic pain or mystery symptoms and stuff like that is actually connected to repressed emotions from childhood trauma. And I thought this was just like a load of BS when I first heard about it because I was like, I don't have trauma. Like I knew my mother was a narcissist, but like I didn't think it was trauma because when you hear trauma, you think of just like something catastrophic and
That's right.
physical,
Hmm.
and you don't
Yes.
think of it as like narcissistic abuse or emotional abuse. And it's like you start believing like, no, like other people have trauma, like other people who grew up in like war torn places of the world, they have trauma. What is my problem? I don't have trauma. This is, borderline offensive. But I had what they say is the gift of desperation, because I tried
Hmm.
everything for my pain. Like I literally tried everything. I was at rock bottom. I, couldn't take painkillers anymore because I was getting ulcers. Like it was just like a whole thing. And it was literally taking over my life, just chasing pain relief. And then so I decided, okay, I have nothing to lose. let me try it, see what happens. And I started doing the emotional work, and within 4 months, I was completely pain free. And that is really like the catalyst that got me to figure out like my sense of self, boundaries, all that kind of stuff, and like
Mm,
actually have confidence for once in my life. So, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love a lot of what you said there. The gift of desperation. It's true, right? It's like eh, sometimes when we just give up on all the, you know, societally approved things that we think are okay to try, and we try something a little more out there. Thankfully, mind body connection is not as out there woo woo as, it used to be, but it definitely could have been to you. I mean, there's still many people that don't feel connected to that kind of verbiage, and haven't experienced it, especially like I said, because you were cut off from your body's emotional intelligence. Why would, why would that be in your forefront? I'm curious. And what you said about chronic pain, unexplained pain, I just want to highlight this for listeners that if you have been experiencing that, this is probably why. It's actually, we know now, a big marker of trauma, probably repressed trauma. What were some of the things that you did? You said talk therapy wasn't working. So what did you do with this newfound mind body connection to release these emotions? What were some of the activities you were doing?
Yeah, so I actually found something called the Curable app, which I would strongly recommend to literally anybody who's going through chronic pain. I stumbled upon it just out of nowhere. Like the algorithm was just starting to get creepy. So, it was a targeted ad towards me that it knew I had chronic pain. And I was like, that's weird, but okay, like purchase 1 year subscription. Just impulsively, like I thought it
Yeah.
was going to hypnotize me into thinking I wasn't in pain or something. And then of course, like once I read what it was about, I was angry. I was like, I can't believe I just wasted money
Mm,
on this subscription. This is so stupid. Like, because like you said, like I did not resonate with something called the mind body connection. It was just so woo woo and out there for me. And like I was all about like science, 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 like, like none of this like holistic kind of stuff. And then of course, still in pain 24 hours later. So I was like, okay, well, I don't think they do refunds on apps. So
mm,
humor me. Let's try it out. Let's see what happens. And basically, you know, once I realized that it was actually rooted in science and Dr. Sarno was actually a medical doctor, I was like, okay, fine. This is like a little bit more legitimate. Like, he's not like a chiropractor or like a holistic whatever. Like, he's not a quack. So he's an he actually had a degree and
yeah.
all that. So I gave it a chance. And it was pretty much like, you know, brain retraining stuff. So basically, changing how your brain perceives pain, because pain is really just a danger signal that's telling you that you're in danger. And when you're a child and you have emotions and you have a parent that's dismissing those emotions, that becomes a pressure cooker over time, because it keeps happening over and over and over again well into adulthood. So it's just like this whole pressure cooker of emotions that your
Mm,
brain literally believes is dangerous. And so really just changing how my brain interprets pain, um, writing exercises like journaling, like expressive writing especially was like the game changer for me. So basically, pen, paper, 20-minute timer, vomit all your thoughts onto paper, destroy the paper after 20 minutes, do it again tomorrow. Like every day doing that. That really helped me to like kind of get the words out of my brain and start actually being able to notice like what the hell was going on in my body emotionally,
yeah.
and recognizing that emotions are actually like a physical process. It's not this mental process where you think that you just have to think about your emotions until you end up in a dark place, and that's exactly how you end up in a dark place. You have to actually feel those emotions in your body. And so, learning how to do that
Mm,
was so important for me, and like really the most important thing for anybody in general to do. Like, narcissistic parent or not, like everyone has some degree of trauma. Like, do the inner work, guys. It's so important. And yeah, it was just a lot of that, and just like education on pain science and how the brain works and how to like rewire neural pathways and all that great stuff. And it
wow.
worked.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Your emotions were dangerous. to you,
Yes.
expressing them. So they got pushed down, bottled down until probably they didn't even come up anymore or you couldn't really
Mhm.
feel them. Um,
Oh, I was really good at numbing out.
yeah,
Like I thought it was like something to be proud of. Like, oh, I don't cry for anything. I'm just stoic and so cool that I don't have emotions.
right. That was like a thing of pride. And you know what? That was your body taking care of you at that time, right? That was
Exactly.
a smart survival instinct that was no longer serving you as you grew
Exactly.
into adulthood.
100%.
Yeah. I wonder what that was like when you started to allow emotion to come through. How I'm curious if you might explain, did you start to feel new sensations? Were you able to easily label your emotions? Yeah. Was it
Good.
overwhelming or subtle? Yeah.
I think I think it was more overwhelming than anything, but I think like the way I started to look at it, like especially in the very early stages, was like, okay, so like this bad thing happened and I just didn't cry about it enough.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I tried to look at it. So yeah, like, a lot of it manifested as just like tears and stuff like that. And then eventually it started, I started noticing like, oh, like there's something happening in my chest or something happening in my stomach. Let me, welcome that in and sit with it. But like it took a lot of like reminding myself that I was safe to do that.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
literally, the brain literally sees it as literal life versus death. And so that's why it's so hard to do that inner work. But again, I had that gift of desperation. So I was like, if I die from feeling this emotion, then I die from feeling this emotion. What are we
Mm.
going to do? I'm
Yeah,
not going to
you're at
care,
the end.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I love what you said about like being with and befriending the different
Yeah.
feelings. What a powerful insight.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, they go away so fast once you actually allow it to be there and you
Yes.
befriend it and you sit with it. Like, the lifespan is literally 90 seconds. But what makes them last so long is that we just keep repressing and repressing and repressing. So once you just let it be uncomfortable, let it suck, acknowledge how much this sucks, and be okay with the discomfort, it's like, okay, cool, finally you heard me, I'm gonna lower down in my intensity, and then there you go, the emotions being released.
They just want to be heard.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's all
Yeah.
it is.
I wonder if as this was happening, your personality was changing and I don't know if you had maybe friends or people in your life that saw differences in you, perhaps becoming more assertive about your feelings, or if that was scary for you.
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I was with my husband, I'm still with my husband, and we were together as well back then. um he definitely noticed like I was less miserable in the pain. um because like, the as the pain started going away, it was like freaking like, what? Like,
Yeah.
this is how normal people feel, like without just like being in excruciating pain every day. So I think, I don't know, I'll have to ask him, like, to I'm just making assumptions here, but
Well, I'm just thinking about how before, you had to always kind of do what your mom wanted and keep her
yeah.
happy. And I'm curious if well, you mentioned that you were a bit like that in some other relationships. But as
Mhm.
you started coming into your own power and like knowing when things upset you and knowing when you didn't want to do something,
Yes.
um,
Oh, totally,
yeah,
totally. A great example. um, so yeah, like I was still, before I started this healing journey, January 2019, I knew my mother was a narcissist. I knew. I wanted to go no contact, but those emotions were like really controlling me because I didn't know about emotions at the time.
yeah,
And so then as I started doing the inner work, like my husband started noticing too that like I just didn't give a shit when my mom would call me. Like I could recognize like, yeah, she's trying to guilt me. It's not going to work because I know better. I've processed so much guilt. I don't have as much repressed guilt anymore. So I'm ending this conversation. Like I would literally just hang up on her and just not care. And then she actually ended up passing away about a year later. And I stood my ground and I like refused to even talk to her when she did go into the hospital until she was declared end of life.
Mhm.
And because that was like, okay, cool, like she can't hurt me anymore, she's on her way out, like
Yeah.
great. But like for me to even get to that point where it was like she's literally going to die, and I'm not going to try and like mend things or anything, because like what's the point? Like she had her whole life to figure that out. She was the adult the entire time, and really doing that inner work really got me to that point where I was so confident to even be okay with that, and still be okay with that to this day. Like I have absolutely no regrets about being a mixture of low and no contact with her. And I don't think that that would have been possible had I not done the inner work.
That's right. Yeah. And I know even from the outside, people gave you a lot of guilt about like, that's your mom, that's your mom. And for others out there, I think that's been a great message that you've shared. Maybe you want to expound a little bit more on what people can expect that from outsiders when they're in a relationship. Do the outsiders, they don't really know what's going on inside your narcissistic relationship. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think it's twofold. There's the genuinely ignorant who like really don't get it, but if they're good people and they're just super just they've never heard of this in their life. They have like a sunshine and rainbows relationship with their mother. They could never imagine it. Like cool, but if they have empathy, they'll be like, "Oh, okay, I understand not everybody has the exact same life experience as I do.
Yeah.
Just because somebody is a mother, it does not make her a saint, you know? Like, just something to really keep in mind for the people who are, you know, confused about like enablers kind of thing. Cause like I had a lot of people in my life like that too, who just genuinely didn't understand, but they were willing to hear me out. They were willing to like understand what I was going through. The people who weren't, who just kept saying, like, that's your mother, you can't say anything bad about her, da 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 da. I realized they're narcissists too, because if
Ah,
you're so okay with that dynamic and abuse and, you know, justifying it and being okay with the fact that, like, the one person that you had to trust by default because biologically you literally had no other choice,
yeah.
and so therefore it's okay for that person to abuse you and literally try to ruin your entire life. If you're okay with that, something's wrong with you.
Good for you. And that's true. And I know we haven't gone too deep into your story, but I know from watching you in some other places, your mother was, controlling many aspects of your life, including your financial life.
Mhm.
Maybe that's a little bit something that you want to talk about because I think sometimes the financial aspect of this kind of abuse is neglected.
Yeah, totally. Like my mother 100% financially abused me. It was, and I didn't even know that's what it was. Like I just thought I literally I literally believed that it was normal for when you're old enough to get your first job and moving forward you give your parents money. Like I thought that was I just thought that was how it is. um had no idea that that's not normal at all. And that, you know, because I thought I was like paying her back for raising me, like, you know, I owed her something.
Wow.
Yeah, which I can totally laugh about now. Like, it just sounds, even as it comes out of my mouth, I'm like, so ridiculous. But I was so like in a mind fuck back then that like I had no idea that like this is just actually financial abuse. And I didn't have my own bank account. Like I had a bank account, but it was like a joint account with my mother.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, up until my final year of university when I was bartending and actually making like pretty good tips. And so what I would do was like I would just like accumulate my tips for like whatever period of time, and then I would give it to my mother to deposit into the bank account. And so this one time I had like, you know, I was saving up for like, you know, couple months or several weeks or whatever. Like back then it was like a big, and I mean, I never had money. So I was like, oh my God, like I'm rich. I had like
Yeah.
$600, right? Which was a lot for me at the time. And I was like, I don't want my mom to have this. like, what can I do about this? So I started brainstorming, and then I Googled, and it like said that like if you're over the age of 18, you're an adult and you're allowed to get your own bank account. So I was like, oh, okay, so I could just like walk into the bank and like bring my ID, and like they'll make an account, and like that's exactly what I did. And I was just like, and like my mom didn't know about it, and I was just like, holy crap. And so my, because it was like the restaurant industry, right? So like there was like a paycheck of like less than minimum wage because you get tips, and so the paychecks were still being deposited into her account, but like
Huh.
eventually she started realizing like I'm not giving her my tip money to deposit. And so somehow, I don't remember the exact conversation, but it came out that I went behind her back and got my own bank account. And like she never let me hear the end of it. And once I got my first big girl job, actually, I think that's how it came out, because I got my first big girl job, and then I wanted the deposits of the checks to go into like my account, not
Sure.
my mother's shared account. And that's when she started charging me rent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Always finding a way to keep that
Exactly.
stronghold on you.
Yep, exactly. And so I just, the idea of moving out just like never seemed possible for me. I was, basically in debt, like funding my mother. And, once it got to the point where, I really, really wanted to move out, I moved out twice actually. So, but that's like another story. But, the first time I moved out, I paid first and last month's rent, and then my mother guilted me into moving back. And so, that started kind of like my debt journey.
Yeah.
And, um, and then I was still having to pay her rent. Like she gave me no break or anything like that. Like I still had to pay her. And then like she kind of started turning it into like, oh, well, you were paying this much for rent, so you're going to pay me that now. Um, you know,
Wow.
and then like I was genuinely terrified that like I would be homeless if I didn't pay her, because, like what am I going to do? And so the second time that I moved out, like I fight like it was just like my final straw. I didn't care anymore, and like I always made the mistake of like anytime I would get a raise or a new job or whatever, like I would obviously disclose my salary to her, and then she would like just up the amount that she would charge me for rent.
Mm.
And at that point, like when I did move out in 2016, yeah, 16, I was like, I don't care if there's more debt. So many people have debt. It is what it is.
Yeah.
I will pay this money that I don't have in order to protect my sanity, because that is priceless. I'm not saying that's the right thing for everyone to do, but like it was completely worth it for me. That's all I'm saying. And even after even after I moved out, she still tried to financially abuse me. Like it was so insane. There was one time where like a couple of weeks after I had moved out, she wanted like my final month of rent, and I was like,
Mm.
I lived there the full month. I don't.
Wow.
Yep. And then she made this argument of like the heating bill. And so like she had electrical heating in her house, so it was like literally thousands of dollars for this freaking heating bill.
Yeah.
And she got that heating bill for like the end of winter, and it was like $1,000, and I had to pay her $500 for the heating. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna do it. And then she's like, she tried to guilt me, and she said like, um because I had my previous dog Chewy, and she basically said like, oh well, I put the heat on for Chewy, and that's your dog, so I could have been a bitch and let him freeze to death. And like she knew that like that dog was like the love of my life, my child, like that dog was my everything.
Yeah.
And so she would use him to kind of like manipulate me into giving her more money and stuff like that, and like, like your dog could have died if it wasn't for me, kind of thing, so you better pay me. And yeah, just like crazy shit like
Yeah,
that.
anything to hold on. I mean, I know you kind of brushed off that you moved out more than once, but this is very common in, intimate partner violence. There's a lot of overlaps here that I'm hearing, and this is a kind of an intimate partner violence. It is, and it's very common um, for folks that are experiencing that to have a hard time leaving, to have to leave multiple times before only twice. That's pretty quick. um, if for all those reasons that you're kind of alluding to, and that guilt of that person, how can you leave me? I've done everything for you. What am I gonna?
All that shit too. And only twice, but within 4 years.
Yeah,
So the
yeah,
first time was 2012, and then by 2016, I was like, no, I'm out. So
yeah. So it
I
could take
it
more
would
than
have probably been
once.
more, yeah, it would have probably been more attempts if I was able to afford it, if I was not being financially abused.
Yeah.
So totally makes
Yeah.
sense.
It's
Yeah.
very hard to get, because I think a lot of times when people hear these stories are like, why didn't you leave? And it's hard for folks who haven't gone through that to understand all the levels of abuse that are there. Um, the lack of belief in yourself that has, you know, been purposely instilled in you.
Hmm.
Learned hopelessness, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Learned
Like my
hopelessness.
mother would always say, like, you're not gonna make it without me. And I believed it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's this combination of that learned hopelessness and that guilt,
Hmm.
and that they're kind of moving between.
Exactly. And when you don't know, and this is why that emotional aspect is so important, because like my body was literally screaming at me with all these repressed emotions. And so when you don't know how to release your emotions, like you're going to feel guilty for breathing wrong. You're going to feel guilty for literally everything.
Mm.
And so, it was like really doing that emotional work, like really broke those chains for me, because if I hadn't done the inner work, like I probably still would be feeling guilty about her death, or like something like that. Like if I didn't do the inner work before she died, like that would have been even more of a shit show than it needed to be.
Yeah.
And so, it's just that inner work is just so important for everybody to do, because you gain so much clarity and you really start to see things for exactly what they are without that emotion distracting you from the actual reality.
Do you still do those practices today?
Yeah, I actually journaled this morning. I do it almost every day.
It sounds like journaling is one of your favorite of
Yeah.
those. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's, if I don't journal, I start getting neck pain after a couple of days. So
I
it's
love that, like that awareness, not the neck pain, but the awareness.
it's so true though, right? And it's like the thing I also want to say for everyone listening is like there's no end game to your healing journey, right? Like as long as you're alive, like you can be like, I have not been through the abuse for years at this point. Like my mother died 4 years ago, and I stopped taking her shit 5 years ago. So we can say I'm 5 years free of like her bullshit. But as long as you are a live, breathing human, life is gonna throw shit at you. And if you don't make it like, and like for me personally, entire lifetime of trauma. I spent more of my life in a traumatized, hypervigilant state than not. Like it's only been 5 years
Yeah.
that, I've known what a regulated nervous system even feels like. And so there's no such thing as like, okay, if you do this for a few months, you're going to be okay and you never have to do it again. Like it's really like, going to the gym, for example. It's not like you're going to go to the gym and work with like a personal trainer for 3 months and then you never go again in your entire life and you expect that those health benefits are going to stay,
Yes.
the same reason you shower every day or you brush your teeth every day. Like it's really like getting rid of that emotional grime that is still a little bit of it. You can go through like the big portion of like all the childhood trauma stuff, which I've done, and I'm sure there's more to come, because like there were a lot of repressed memories, and every now and again a new one comes up and then I journal about it. And even just like stuff that happens throughout the day, it's like it can trigger something, but it doesn't matter what it's triggering as long as you're working through it. So I just cannot emphasize that there is no end goal to the healing journey. I don't consider myself like this fully healed unicorn. Like I'm a human. Um, Anyone who portrays themselves as like this fully healed unicorn with
Yeah.
no problems in their life is probably trying to scam you. And it's just this ongoing thing. Like the consequence of being alive on this planet is like you have to deal with your emotions, and otherwise
Yes.
your body's gonna start screaming at you.
Yes. It's such a good reminder. I used to like really think there was an end game. And you know, it's been helpful to settle into that reality that we're always in process, and it's eased my perfectionist tendencies quite a bit to
Same.
know, yeah, never gonna get there, so might as well chill out. Just keep working slow and steady.
Totally.
Um, so many good things there. We're gonna have an episode actually coming up on therapeutic journaling. So um, you're a good plug for that.
Amazing. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about just a few other things as you're talking about this, like how do you still see yourself sometimes in life like trying to appease, having a little bit of that, you know, hypervigilance, or thinking someone will get mad at you for speaking up for yourself? um,
Totally.
yeah,
Absolutely. But the difference is I catch myself now.
that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And you mentioned that you have some like stronger boundaries. And is there any work that you do to like keep fortifying those? Are there like, do you have like, I don't know, any, you know, I won't do this, I won't do that, or is it more something you just feel in your relationships when you're giving too much, or
Yeah. I mean, I haven't really had the need for boundaries in a while at this point, and I think that's just because I have, just healthy people in my life at this point. But it's
mm,
one of those things where just like I vibe it out kind of thing. Like I know my nervous system is going to warn me about something
yeah.
if there is something to be warned about. And my radar has not failed me once. Like it like there's been a few times where it's like, oh, like I've had a bad feeling about somebody, and sure enough, I ignored it, but I caught it very early that I was like, oh, okay, wait a minute, like actually this is sketchy. Now I'm going to take a step back. But like beforehand it would have taken me probably years to figure it out, so
It's always
it's
such a tricky process, right? Because I get those like spidey senses about someone, but then I want to be like, am I judging them,
out.
you know?
Yeah.
And so we start to question it. And then I tell myself, well, you know what? Usually you're right. When you feel that, usually you're right. You can give it a little time to show its true
Hmm.
colors before making that judgment. But usually, if we've worked on our nervous systems, yeah. So
Totally.
I'd love to leave people with a few more tips for if they're dealing with a narcissist. I was looking at, you have some really great reels and tips on your Instagram, and there's something, I'm going to get it wrong. It's called like the gray rock, or the. Can you share what that is? I thought that was excellent.
Yeah, totally. So gray rock is basically a boundary that you can have with a narcissist. And like there's realistically, like realm of reality, only three boundaries you can have with a narcissist: no contact, low contact, or gray rock. And so the first two kind of speak for themselves, I'd say, but gray rock is basically the tool that you would use if you have to be in contact with them for some reason, if there's like a legal obligation, if, maybe you're not quite ready to like take the plunge into the world of no or low contact. Like, everyone's situation's different, zero judgment here. But gray rock is basically like you're taking the drama away from the narcissist because, like we talked about earlier in this episode, they want your emotional reaction. They want narcissistic supply from you. And so, gray rocking is you taking your power back and taking away the supply. So, whatever they say to you, you're giving them like a one word answer. You don't care about, them judging you. Like, you don't care about whatever crap they're saying to rope you into an argument you're never going to win or a conversation that's never going to make sense. And just giving them like one word answers, no emotional reaction. And obviously it's easier said than done, but it's and the thing is, when you start gray rocking, the narcissist is probably going to get worse because they're going to notice like, oh, like my target has taken supply away from me. Time to try harder to get more supply.
Yeah.
And so, it can be really hard to keep that gray rock strong, but this is why, again, the emotional work so important, because once you start processing the emotions, you are genuinely not going to care about whatever crap the narcissist is saying to you in order to try to rope you into an emotional reaction.
Mm.
And yeah, you just keep it very surface level. Like, don't, you didn't have a good day, you didn't have a bad day, you had a day. Like, you're not looking forward to anything, you're not dreading anything, there's literally nothing going on in your life, you are the most boring person in the world. And
Mm.
like, eventually, not right away, but eventually, if you stick to it, because if you don't stick to it and you give them a little supply here and there, like, they're never going to leave you alone. You have to really channel that inner brick wall and,
Yeah.
not give them anything, and then they will give up over time. But they're not going to, it's not like they're not going to put up a fight. So it's just, you have to really be realistic about it and just remember, like, you're dealing with someone who feels so entitled to getting a reaction out of you that it's going to seem like gray rocking doesn't work, but it does, as long as you're actually doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is bringing up a lot of connections for me because it's kind of the opposite of what's happening to the person who's being abused, because if the abuser, if the narcissist was always mean, right? Then you'd probably leave. And that's why they give you that little bit of like sweetness that you remember from the beginning. And
Exactly.
it's like it's like our phones. It's like, the lotto machine. We keep going, we we keep going back because there's that one bit of sweetness or we remember. And so
Hmm.
the same thing on the other side, if you give them anything, if you don't stick to it, they're going to know that they can basically break you. They're going to keep coming at you harder. And it makes so much sense that when you first start doing that, they're going to try new methods. It might feel really tough for a while, but they're going to give up eventually because they're not getting water from that rock or whatever. They're going to find it elsewhere. I wonder if narcissists go after more vulnerable targets, or if they enjoy breaking seemingly stronger victims. I don't know if you have any insights on this.
I mean, it's whoever's there.
Yeah.
Whoever happens to be there in that moment. Like, they basically live in the moment, and whoever's giving them the supply they feel entitled to in that moment, that's going to be their target. And so they don't only target vulnerable people, but like, if you are vulnerable, you're a prime target, because they can kind of play on that vulnerability, appeal to your empathy, make it seem like they're there for you, they care about you, all that kind of stuff. Everything that you need in that moment conveniently is all there. How great. And it's like, you're in that state where, not necessarily all there, for lack of a better way to describe it, but it's like, you don't have your wits about you as much as you would if you weren't in a vulnerable state, and you wouldn't be able to see it. Again, this is why the emotional work is so important, because even when you're going through something, you have to do the work, because then you're going to still be able to recognize when someone's trying to manipulate you. And someone who's like confident and comes from a happy family, stuff like that, like, they enjoy breaking people down like that too. So you don't necessarily have to be vulnerable in order to be targeted by a narcissist.
Yeah.
You just have to be a good person. And it just depends if their tactics are going to work on you, and they will love bomb you for as long as they need to, until that mask can start slipping off, as soon as they gain your trust.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we had someone on talking about cults, and I asked, is he said there's no one that's not vulnerable to that unless you are a complete sociopath. Like you have nothing. Everyone, even the strongest person with the best upbringing, can be vulnerable to
Totally.
those tactics. So it's good for
100%.
us all to know. I'm wondering if narcissists can be cured. I imagine there are a lot of people on the other side of narcissistic behavior that are trying to cure their narcissist, fix their narcissist, think if maybe they even are using the gray rock method as almost manipulative, like way to change them. Um, can we fix a narcissist, or can they ever get self-awareness?
Oh boy.
I'm opening a big can of worms.
Not at all. Long story short, no, they're not going to change. I'm sure you may have seen self-aware narcissists on the social media talking about themselves being a narcissist, but let's unpack that a little bit. Sure, maybe they're in therapy, but they're probably not even doing the work. They're just going
Yeah,
because maybe they've been court mandated to go or something like that.
that's right.
And by posting about it on social media, who is going to follow that content? Vulnerable people who are in a narcissistic relationship, going through so much pain, and now they're going to give that narcissist supply. And so, as their social media grows, they are getting so much supply from the comments, the likes, potentially even like making money and coaching people. Like, imagine being coached by a narcissist to heal from narcissistic abuse. I don't know. I mean, some people, they want to hear it from the horse's mouth, I guess, but like, it's all bullshit. It's all smoke and mirrors. They're not actually doing any sort of inner work. I've done a summit in the past where there was a self-aware narcissist on it, and like I had to like go off my camera because I was like, it was taking everything I had not to roll my eyes at the things this person was saying. Like, they had written a book, and then they were saying like, oh, in 500 years when people are still reading my book. I'm like,
Ah,
oh god, like, okay, bud. Like, you really think?
yeah,
Okay. So it's like, yeah, they can become self aware, but they're not going to change. They're absolutely not going to change. They're still going to be exactly who they are. And the thing is, like, you know, don't hold out for somebody to change. Like, your life is worth so much more than waiting around for a grown adult to behave like a grown adult.
that's right.
And I'll also share like anecdotal evidence of my own that they don't change. My narcissistic mother took all of her bullshit with her to her deathbed. Like, she was literally, so she had Alzheimer's and like dementia and all that kind of stuff. So like before she kind of lost the ability to speak and stuff like that, before she was actively passing away, like she was just like this broken record, just like kind of pleasant, but like I knew it wasn't her. I knew it was the disease.
Yeah.
And then when she was in the hospice, and it took her like 8 weeks to die. So I mean, I kept going every week thinking this is the last time, and then it was just like, holy shit, like, when is this gonna end? um
Yeah, of course, right?
really hung on there. But this was like towards the very end, and like on death's doorstep. Like, she cannot speak, she cannot eat, she doesn't drink water anymore. She's just like existing, looking past you, like, completely unaware. She still managed to muster up enough energy, and like she was skin and bones at this point too. Like, she was like she looked half dead.
Yeah.
She mustered up the energy to give me the death glare, like that glare of like pure hatred and disgust
Wow.
and contempt towards me. And the nurse was right beside me when this happened, and she was like, is that what you grew up with your entire life? I'm like, yep. And she's like, I understand why you're estranged.
Mm.
I'm so sorry you went through that. And like, it was like the real her came out to play one last time. So like, no, they don't change.
I'm glad you got that validation.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Especially in that moment, in that
Yeah,
final
'cause, like,
moment.
most of the medical staff were like, "Oh, that's your mother," da, da, da," but like this nurse was like a gem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really valuable, because there's so many of us that, especially in the wellness space, don't want to, believe the best in people, see the best in people, believe they can change, can easily get convinced that folks can change. And
And that's the trap.
that's the trap. And I really like what you said about doing the work, because just because someone is signed up for therapy or going to therapy, it doesn't mean they're doing the work. I'm studying to be a therapist myself. And, you know, one of the things we talk about is the client has to do the work. We can't do it for them. So it's very astute. I'm
Totally.
wondering if we're coming to the end of the hour. Is there something that I didn't ask you that you feel like it's important to get out there?
I don't know. I feel like we covered a lot, but if there's anything else you want to
Well,
ask
we
me or cover, go for it.
definitely want people to know how to reach you, how to learn from you, how to work with you. Shout out all those great links.
Totally. Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or Facebook under the username Let's Get Your Shift Together. That's shift with an F, all one word.
I love it.
And ways to work with me, I have a couple of different options. So there's one-on-one coaching, which you can find at the link in my, and all of these options you'll find at the link in my bio on whichever social media you find me on. There's one-on-one coaching. There's a community group coaching program that's 6 months long as well, called the Freedom Program. That's a really great one too. We have twice monthly Q&As, and then there's also one-on-one boxer support twice per month as well, which I almost never offer. So
Wow.
that's a really good one to get into. And then there's also my small group 3-month bulletproof group coaching program, which is, 8 people or less in a group. I only offer it twice per year. I will be opening up a new round very soon, and tons and like all the support you can possibly imagine, like tenfold. You know, I might even be a little bit annoying supporting you, but it's a really great, thorough program, like amazingness. So the applications for that is at the link in my bio as well. Um, and yeah, there's like other resources too. I've got some self-paced like guidebooks and things like that. Courses, all the things. You can find all of it at the link in my bio or on my website.
You do. You have a lot of offerings. I'm really glad you highlighted the small group. I think there's something really therapeutically powerful about being with others who have gone through something similar, especially in this particular instance where you might need to get things validated that you're not sure about, and hear that feedback from others. That sounds like a really powerful offering.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like, you know, people who do the bulletproof program, like they do a lot better, and like Freedom's still new, but like it's more people, and like there's no real cap on how many people can join. Like it's still pretty small. So I mean, if anyone wants to join Freedom, go for it while it's still small and it's not like a gong show of people.
Yeah.
But I find that like the people who do bulletproof, like they get like they form friendships like with these people that are in the group, and
Yeah.
it's like such an intimate small container. And there's the group chat that we have like between calls so that they can keep staying in touch with each other, and so many of them have continued keeping in touch with each other like beyond the program ending. And it's like worth the world to just have not only the validation from myself, who has been through it and is on the other side, but also the people who are also going through it. And they're all relating to each other, and it's not
That's
like
right.
an overwhelming group of people. So I love it. It's my
No, a
favorite
tight
part.
group of eight, the validation. Also, we learn in relationship. So
Yeah.
we learn to change our patterns in relationship. And it might take time to figure out what your boundaries are coming out
Hmm.
of narcissistic abuse, to, what is okay for someone to ask of you and what isn't, and figuring that out for yourself within a safe, contained small group with someone there who's facilitating, who can really keep that safe and hold that container, I think is a beautiful thing. So we will link that and all your offerings in the show notes, of course. I want to thank you so much. I imagine you're very, very busy, and you've been very generous with your time and with your tips. And I just want to say how much I appreciate you sharing your story with me and with the listeners here.
Thank you so much for having me. I, always appreciate having an opportunity to share this information with as many people as possible. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for reaching out, and I'm really glad we had this chat.
Yeah, I'm glad you found meaning in helping others move forward and not have to go through what you went through. Thank you so
Totally.
much.
You're welcome.